The lunacy of our politicians on climate and energy is almost beyond belief, isn't it? We could laugh about it all day, but the trouble is that real people are hurt by this stuff. Families struggle to pay their power bills, small businesses are squeezed by rising costs, and of course people lose their jobs when industry moves offshore. Despite our energy crisis, the rising costs and the stretched supplies that tell us we've killed off too much reliable, dispatchable electricity generation and that we're too dependent on intermittent, unreliable, renewable energy, well, despite all that, our politicians just pretend otherwise. They say we need more renewables, and they say it often with a straight face. We talked yesterday about the so-called capacity mechanism. This will see money paid to power generators to have some reserve capacity available, pay them to make sure we have some power when we need it, so the lights don't go off. What we've done to our electricity grid is very easy to explain. We wanted to reduce emissions, so we started subsidising renewables so that more wind and solar farms would be built and coal and gas generation would be forced out. That's cost us tens of billions of dollars, and it's worked because it has forced out lots of gas and coal-fired electricity. In fact, it's worked so well, and these people were so stupid in not considering the consequences, that now they're going to subsidise coal and gas generation to keep it online so that we've got supplies when we need them. And people pretend this is a market, and people pretend this is clever. But in Victoria, it gets even worse. They're going to reject this hypocrisy. The Andrews Labor government says that under the capacity mechanism, it will exclude coal and gas.
Let's be clear about this. The future is about renewables, whether it is wind or solar or battery storage, particularly when it can firm up and turn into baseload synchronous energy, renewable energy.
Sure, why pay subsidies to force fossil fuels out and then subsidise fossil fuels to keep them in? It does seem crazy, but why would you do that? Well, because the alternative is to have blackouts, or greenouts, as I like to call them. The only alternative is to run out of power, because you can't guarantee capacity with anything else. Batteries are next to useless. Hundreds of millions of dollars will give you just a few minutes power. And pumped hydro might help, but that'll take a decade if you're lucky. So Victoria effectively is not going to help secure supplies at all. If it's not using gas or coal, it won't help secure supplies at all. It'll end up freeloading on the national electricity grid, relying on Tasmanian hydro or coal-fired power from New South Wales and Queensland if it gets stuck. The whole national electricity market is fast becoming a sham. Perhaps we ought to get back to each state looking after itself. Anyway, if the energy crisis of the past couple of weeks hasn't woken up our politicians to reality, perhaps we'll have to wait for blackouts over the summer or next winter. When there's no power, the politicians won't be able to dodge reality any longer, which is what's happened now in Europe. The Germans have so long been held up as the renewable energy heroes, getting rid of coal-fired power and building up their renewables. Well, now, in desperation, along with neighbouring Austria, they've decided to reopen their coal-fired generators, because in the end, virtue signalling won't cut it. In the end, you need power.
Now, as EU nations continue to search for new alternative sources of gas supplies to cater to the demand amid a looming energy crisis in Europe, Austria's government has now said that it would reopen a previously closed coal power station in order to meet the energy demands.
For the German government, time is of the essence, which is why, really, through gritted teeth, they are deciding to power up those coal-fired power plants again, because they simply feel like they have no other choice. And I have to say, it would be a very difficult decision for Robert Habeck in particular, the man charged with all of this, because his political background is from the Green Party. They are against coal entirely. And yet, faced with the real politic of governing, they are now having to say that despite that bitter pill, they are going to have to swallow it, because if they don't, Germany could really start to have some power outages or problems over winter.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when the Green left media in Australia was hailing the green policies of Germany and saying Australia's energy policy should be more like Germany's. That was about 2 years ago. It was laughable then, but it's a sick joke now. The United Nations and other climate evangelists are now cranky at countries like Germany.
The rush for new supplies of fossil fuels is delusional, says the United Nations chief. The United Nations Secretary General, speaking at a meeting in Austria, said the country is exploiting new fossil fuel energy resources in response to a global energy crunch, are ignoring the science on climate change.
We are witnessing a historic and dangerous disconnect. Science and citizens are demanding ambitious and transformative climate action. Meanwhile, many governments are dragging their feet.
Dragging their feet. I mean, fancy wanting to maintain electricity supplies. The UN would prefer people to freeze and schools to be shut down and industries to close rather than countries generate the electricity that runs their societies. One of the only European nations not facing any of these dramas is France. Its nuclear power is reliable and affordable and creates no greenhouse gases. And it earns cash because it exports excess power to its neighbours. How about that? There seems to be a silver bullet, but everyone's too busy bowing before wind turbines to notice. By the way, my documentary about going nuclear will run again here on Sky News on Sunday night. But let me bring this back to the local debate, because the so-called moderates of the Liberal Party are again displaying their infamous inability to comprehend politics and the wishes of mainstream voters. The Australian Financial Review is reporting that the moderates are lining up to cross the floor if the coalition looks to oppose Labor's higher emissions reductions targets for 2030. As I said the other day, this new target should be Labor's death warrant given our energy crisis, but the Liberal moderates, well, they love it. Yet, after moving to the left and losing government, the moderates reckon the answer to the coalition's woes is to be more like the Greens, more like Labor, more like the Teals. It's no surprise the leading remaining moderate, Simon Birmingham, well, he was talking like a Teal even the morning after the election.
Should you now shift on your 2030 position?
David, given the fact that we are looking like we will exceed that 2030 position of 26 to 28%, of course we should commit to being able to go further.
So let's get this right. The nation is in an energy crisis now because we've gone too far with emissions reductions and renewable energy. And the same policy misstep has created such a dire situation in Europe that they're reopening old coal-fired power stations. But the so-called moderate Liberals say we should race faster down this dead-end route. And they reckon this is the way to win elections. Now, hang on a minute. The coalition almost won in 2010, taking away Labor's majority, by opposing a carbon price. They won a thumping victory in 2013, promising to axe the carbon tax. And they won in 2016 and 2019 by promising not to go as hard and fast on climate policy as Labor. And then in 2022, the coalition decided to match Labor's climate aspirations of net zero, and they were thumped, turfed out of office. And the lesson these so-called moderates draw is that they need to get even greener on climate policy. They have no idea. The coalition will not win again unless these people are put in their place. The coalition will not win again unless it embraces common sense, logical policies and supports reliable and affordable energy as a higher priority than climate gestures that hurt people and businesses without doing anything meaningful for the environment.